Welcome back, A Pushers. This is Mr. B History coming at you with the part 2, chapter 20 notes, Becoming a World Power. It's all about that U.S. imperialism when big, strong nations beat up little, tiny nations, and the United States is one of those big, strong nations. In our last episode, we were talking about the cause and effects of the Spanish-American War. In this one, we'll be talking about everything else after the Spanish-American War. Let's go get that knowledge. Remember, this is Mr. B History, your place for A Push notes and A Push knowledge. Let's go. We gotta scroll through all these things though real quick. Bing. There we are. Open door policy in China. Let's go. Like the name suggests, open door policy means that China is going to be an open door. This is created by William McKinley's Secretary of State, John Hay. China was divided into spheres of influence by other European powers. USA wanted some of that action, some trading action with China, because China has, 1.3 billion people. That's a lot of consumers. And so John Hay crafts this diplomatic note called the Open Door Policy. And that policy is that all nations, including the U.S., had the right to trade with China, not just the spheres of influence nations. To back this up, when the Boxers, or the secret society of Chinese nationalists, calls the Society of the Harmonious Fists, or the Boxers, when they rebelled and tried to throw the foreigners outside of China, once upon a time in China, when they tried to kick out the foreigners, the U.S. sent troops to China to help stop the rebellion. Hay backed up his first round of notes with the second round of notes, which was still a continuation of the open door policy, which is we're going to preserve, the United States says that China has to preserve its territorial integrity and equal and partial trade with everyone. So the United States is really interested in trade with China. What do you know? Some things never change. All right. Theodore Roosevelt's big stick policy. McKinley was shot by an anarchist in 1901. Pew! Pew! And Theodore in air quotes, Teddy Roosevelt becomes the president. Teddy Roosevelt has an aggressive imperialistic foreign policy that he sums up in a great motto, which is speak softly and carry a big stick. So not a lot of yelling, but a lot of hitting. Which is a very aggressive thing. He's not going to yell. He's just going to hit. The big stick, he uses the big stick diplomacy, or this aggressive foreign policy, to move the United States into a position of world power by doing several things, including building the Panama Canal, dominating Central America and the Caribbean, modernizing the Navy, and making the U.S. into an international policeman. Hey, you guys, break it up. No longer are we going to be isolated and neutral. The United States is going to be imperialistic, interventionist, and internationalist. That's some great words right there for the word wall. The Panama Canal. We'll start with the Panama Canal. In the Spanish-American War, the United States got Guam and the Philippines over in the Pacific Ocean. We also annexed Hawaii. Because of these new territories, the United States needed, and because we wanted to trade with China, see the open door policy, and we wanted to trade with Japan too, Americans soon realized that they needed a shortcut between the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean because they had to send their fleet all around South America to get to the Pacific Ocean. It took a really, really long time, cost more money, and it would be very, very difficult. So Theodore Roosevelt orchestrated a revolt in Panama, something about a donkey, and because Panama used to belong to Colombia. That's a fun fact. But they orchestrated a revolt, created a country called Panama, and then Panama gave the land to the United States to build the canal. It's called the Canal Zone. It's 51 miles long, 10 miles wide, and he convinced them to give it over to the United States forever, ever, and ever, and ever. But there's a fun fact. Eventually, the United States felt bad about doing this, and we returned the Canal Zone to Panama in 1999. There you go. Basically year 2000. Building the canal took them from 1904 to 1914. That's 10 years. They finished just in time for World War I. It was a huge project. People died of yellow fever and malaria, and there was lots and lots and lots of digging. That's all we're going to talk about it. lots of digging, but they got it done. Ooh. Whoa. We're having a hard time moving these slides today. Apologize. All right, Roosevelt's corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Roosevelt quoted the Monroe Doctrine, U.S. would intervene in Latin American countries to prevent European nations from interfering in Latin American countries in violation of the Monroe Doctrine. That sounds like a whole lot of stuff. So basically, to keep America isolated from European nations, we would intervene and be not isolated, right? Not isolationist, and intervene and get involved and be interventionist in Latin American countries. This was all to further what President Monroe and his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, said way back in the early 1800s, saying that European nations, European colonization of Europe, or European colonization of South America, Central and South America, was over. Over the next 20 years, the United States used the Roosevelt Corollary to justify sending troops to Haiti, Honduras, Dominican Republic, and Nicaragua. These countries did not appreciate it, and this became known as the bad neighbor policy. Like a bad neighbor, U.S. is there. Oh. All right, on to East Asia, internationalism. Internationalism. That means interacting with all sorts of other nations. It's another thing that goes against isolationism. It's very friendly at first, then competitive. We compete with East Asia. So let's get to the friendly part. The Russo-Japanese War in 1904. Teddy Roosevelt negotiates an end to the fighting. Fun fact, he wins the Nobel Peace Prize for this. He also negotiated other disputes among nations, participated in international conferences, internationalism, to go along with his aggressive foreign policy. Teddy Roosevelt also negotiated the Gentleman's Agreement, where the Japanese government agrees to restrict immigration to the United States in exchange for stopping California's discriminatory laws. Apparently, California was segregating Japanese American students from everybody else and made the Japanese American students go to different schools. This was not acceptable to the Japanese, and so they worked out this deal behind the scenes. East Asia continued. So we talked about Teddy Roosevelt modernizing the Navy. He was influential in creating the Great White Fleet, which was 16 all-steel battleships, top-of-the-art, state-of-the-art, brand new, with all the latest technology, made out of steel, because, we're producing steel in massive quantities right now. Roosevelt sent them on a world tour. This is actually the big stick, right? So when he says, speak softly and carry a big stick, it's not he's going to hit you with a big stick. If you don't listen to what he says, he's going to send his all-steel battleships to knock on your door and shoot you. So this tour goes from 1907 to 1909 to demonstrate that the United States can send our boats all around the world. So nobody's safe from the United States. We now have Navy power. Yeah. By the way, this is a big hit in Japan. That's just a side note. Speaking of the Route Takahira Agreement in 1908, this is respect between Japan and the United States and open door policy to China. So there you go. One of the outcomes of the Great White Fleet Tour is this deal with Japan. William Howard Taft. After being president for a while, the next president is William Howard Taft from 1909 to 1913. And his foreign policy is known as dollar diplomacy. He does not speak softly and carry a big stick. He's mildly expansionist, not wildly expansionist and imperialistic like Teddy Roosevelt was. He wanted to promote U.S. trade by supporting American businesses abroad. His quote is, "I'm going to substitute dollars for bullets." That's where they get dollar diplomacy from. It's not as aggressive as Roosevelt, and it's not as successful as Roosevelt either. One of his first failures is railroads in China. Taft tries to get U.S. rights to build railroads in China, but was ignored by Russia and Japan. This is a failure of dollar diplomacy. His dollar diplomacy leads to intervention in Nicaragua. They had to send U.S. Marines to protect U.S. investments from 1912 to 1933. And then the Lodge Corollary. Henry C. Lodge passed a resolution that non-European powers could not own territory in the Western Hemisphere. This angered both Latin America and Japan, who was reportedly trying to buy some land in Mexico. Woodrow Wilson and moral diplomacy. Woodrow Wilson is the next president during this time period. He's president from 1913 to 1921 with Woodrow Wilson. He is anti-imperialist but an internationalist. So unlike his predecessors, Roosevelt and Taft, who were both Republicans, Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat, and he was an anti-imperialist, so he did not approve of bullying other little nations, but he did approve of being internationalist, so he did not favor isolation and neutrality. On the contrary, he favored internationalism or working with other nations. He has limited success with his moral approach to foreign policy, which is respect other nations and try to spread democracy, i.e. moral diplomacy, opposed to big stick diplomacy or dollar diplomacy. Some examples of his moral diplomacy would be the Jones Act of 1916, which grants, instead of being a colony, the Philippines is going to become a territory. It's going to get a Bill of Rights and voting for male citizens, and a promise to be independent once a stable democracy is established, which turns out takes them all the way to July 4th, 1946, which is after World War II. Puerto Rico in 1917, Woodrow Wilson is influential in getting citizenship to all Puerto Ricans. And then, considering the Panama Canal, he repealed an act that granted U.S. ships an exemption from the paying of the canal tolls, which would have given an unfair advantage to U.S. shipping. And then he also worked conciliation treaties. His Secretary of State, none other than Williams Jennings Bryan, as we saw from our earlier quote at the beginning of chapter 20, William Jennings Bryan was definitely anti-imperialistic, right? So he had the quote that was against imperialism. He arranged treaties between 30 different nations to bring their disagreements to international commissions and not take military action for at least a year. That's some moral diplomacy. Woodrow and military intervention. But, students, he wasn't completely successful in moral diplomacy. As your book said, he had a blind eye when it turned to Central America. Woodrow Wilson's anti-imperialism did not apply to Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. He sent U.S. troops to Nicaragua, Haiti, and Dominican Republic to quote, end quote, maintain stability. The Tampico incident. Wilson sent a fleet to Mexico to stop the military dictatorship of General V. Huerta, who was, I guess, leader of Mexico between 1913 and 1914. The U.S. occupied the port city of Veracruz. War was averted by negotiation by the ABC powers of Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa led raids into Texas and New Mexico and killed Americans in an effort to destabilize the new government of Mexico. General John J. Pershing led a U.S. expeditionary force in a failed attempt to capture the ballot. Basically, he just went into Mexico looking for him. He failed. He quit trying because of U.S. entry into World War I. And that, students, is the end of chapter 20. Or U.S. imperialism, and hopefully you learned a lot.